This is City Hall on the south bank of the River Thames in Southwark. Until January 2022, this was the headquarters of the Greater London Authority and where the London Assembly met to debate and make decisions. This is also City Hall. This one, formerly called the Crystal, is on Kamal Chunchie Way in Newham. As of January 2022, it's now the headquarters of the Greater London Authority and where the London Assembly meets to debate and make decisions. It's around 8 kilometres by cycle between the old and new City Halls. Since this is now on our patch at Newham Cyclists, we thought we'd show you the route. But we're also going to try something a little bit different this time, and provide you with some commentary. The way we're going to do this is using a format pioneered by the channels Not Just Bikes and Shifter. It's called +1 - 2. Every time we come across something that's nice and makes it more enjoyable or feels safer to cycle, we'll award a point. Every time we come across something that makes it harder or feel less safe to cycle, we'll take away 2 points. We'll keep a running count in the corner. This is the route we're going to take. We're going to cross the river at Tower Bridge, then use Cycle Superhighway 3 on Cable Streets, go through Poplar, and then use the Lower Lee crossing to get to the Royal Docks. We're starting on this pedestrianised area at the front of the old City Hall by the river. We need to walk a bit to get to a place where we can cycle, so let's go. You'll often find people here walking with bikes or cycling very slowly. Despite cycling not being allowed, that doesn't stop people from wanting to cycle here. Now we're on our way south towards Tooley Street, and we can cycle again. We'll start counting now. You can't drive through these rising bollards, but you can cycle through them. That's nice. Now we're going to turn left onto Tooley Street. This will form part of Cycleway 4 all the way from London Bridge to Deptford, Greenwich and Woolwich. This is a temporary protected cycle lane. It's a bit narrow, but it is usable. Definitely better than nothing. Cyclists have priority when going straight ahead here. This cabbie understands the markings and gives way. That's good. Now we need to go to the top of the street here and then turn left. Oh, there's a green... Oh, missed it. Oh well, no such luck. Watch closely here, because you'll see lots of people crossing even when they don't have a green light. That's a sign that the waiting times are much too long for people walking and cycling. Eventually I'm allowed to go more than 1.5 minutes later. We're now on Tower Bridge Road. This doesn't have a protected cycle lane, only this useless bit of paint at the edge of the road. Ugh, horrible. On the plus side, this is a really nice view at sunset. That's a nice thing. I'll give it a point for that. On the other hand, there's a queue of traffic here, which is noisy and it smells. Not nice. The amount of oncoming traffic makes it hard to see pedestrians who are crossing, for instance, here. These barriers will probably keep pedestrians safe from any vehicle attacks, but won't keep you safe if you're on this side. The single lane we had over the bridge now fans out to 3 separate lanes, but there's no dedicated space for cycling. I'm now having to filter to the front here so I can use the advanced stop box. But before I can get there, the light changes, so now I need to squeeze into my correct lane. That's not pleasant. Once we're on Mansell Street though, we get a bike lane. It's not protected, but there's no conflicting movements, so this doesn't actually feel so bad. And I even get a protected junction. And this protected junction takes me round to Royal Mint Street, where there's a protected cycle track. It's nice, but it is much too narrow, as is the pavement, as you can see here. These low-level traffic lights make it easy for me to see when the light changes, and I have my own path through the junction. You might be able to hear from the rattling, but the surface here isn't great. Not only are there things like manhole covers and failed curbstones and patchwork repairs that haven't held up, but you'll also see that every time there's a side entrance, the track dips down to meet the road, rather than the road having a ramp up over the track. This leads to a roller coaster effect, and it's really annoying. This delivery rider actually has to swing into the opposite lane to be able to turn onto the track. That's a sign, again, that the track is much too narrow. Unlike the last junction, at this junction you have to press a button to get a green light. This is annoying, and many people don't realise you have to do it. They then end up waiting for ages for a green that will never come, and end up jumping the red light, like that person did there. This is just poor. At least we're not kept waiting too long here. Dockless hire bikes are super convenient, but if there's nowhere to leave them, people often leave them on the pavement in the way of pedestrians. This junction changed recently, and it's really nice. It's wide, and it's clear that you, going straight ahead, have priority over cars turning across your path. Even though this cycleway is really narrow, it also feels safe because it's separated from traffic. This means that it's very popular. You see people of all ages, genders and backgrounds cycling here pretty much 24/7. And it definitely feels safer to cycle here when the majority of other people on the streets are cycling too. The cycleway crosses to the other side of the road here, and the angle is really sharp. Many people, unsurprisingly, cross diagonally. It's much too annoying, and you have to slow way down, often to give way to traffic that simply isn't there. We're about to cross Butcher Row. Here, the crossing is shared between pedestrians and cyclists, which is annoying and not especially safe. And that van driver clearly thought the red light wasn't for them. Butcher Row, by the way, is a connection to two major roads to the south, so it's unsurprising that a lot of the time that crossing is blocked by queuing traffic. The good news is we're now sent through the park, which means we don't have to ride next to lots of traffic. That's nice. But this bike lane, again, is much too narrow. At the bottom of this slope, we end up on Horseferry Road. This is a one-way road with a contraflow for cycling, which is nice and clear. And these wands help separate us from oncoming traffic at the point where the road curves. And we get priority when we join this road here. There's no separated cycle lanes on this road, but that's not really a problem. The traffic volumes are low enough that it's comfortable to share space. These markings for the cycle route are much too close to parked cars. Less experienced cyclists may end up putting themselves in danger if a car door opens suddenly. They should be moved further out. The road surface is very smooth here, and the low traffic volumes help to keep it that way. This also means it's easy to see pedestrians, and it's easy for pedestrians to see you, which helps people cross the street in a relaxed way. Unfortunately, that surface isn't so smooth anymore. Best hope you're not carrying home any eggs from the shops. These mini roundabouts aren't great in rush hour. Many drivers simply ignore them. At this point, the cycle superhighway turns right, which many people find hard to do, especially, again, in rush hour when there's queuing traffic, which makes it harder to see. And And here, you have to press another beg button to be allowed to cross the road. Ugh. At least this time, we get lucky and we can cross the road immediately. That's nice. This path avoids having to cycle next to the main road, and it's surprisingly well lit and it feels safe. Unfortunately, you do have to cross the road eventually, and here you have to wait for this traffic light on a slope, which is annoying and potentially dangerous. Watch this delivery driver, by the way. He jumps the red light here, but he can see there's no cars coming, and he's trying to get the green lights on the second stage of the crossing straight ahead. I am still waiting for the first stage to clear. It's super annoying to be kept waiting for traffic that simply isn't there. In the end, that delivery driver only saved around 40 seconds, but still, if you're against the clock, and you can see that there's no traffic coming, is it any wonder that people choose to make their own decision and jump the red light? This bit's alright. It's a dead end to motor traffic, so it's nice and quiet and smooth. At first glance, this area might also look nice and quiet. But what I want you to remember is that we filmed this on a Sunday afternoon. During rush hour on weekdays, this is much busier, particularly during school run times. And also, that didn't feel pleasant. By the way, you're not supposed to overtake on a zebra crossing or on the approach to a zebra crossing where you see those zigzag markings. There's a short bit of cycle track here to bypass that pinch point in the road, which is nice. Unfortunately, it just disappears here. Traffic often backs right up here, and you have to share with buses. Even though bus drivers are usually careful, it's never pleasant to have to cycle around such a large vehicle. And we don't get any protection at the junction either, just useless paint. This driver has overshot the give way line and has their vehicle peeking out into the cycle lane. And here we have a cycle lane that's painted in the door zone of parked cars, exactly where you should never ever cycle. This section is alright because it's another dead-end street, so there's no real through traffic to contend with. At this point you need to make a sharp left turn on cobblestones, which is very slippery in the wet. Not good. And this shared area isn't really necessary. Surely they could have had a separated track through here. At least these bollards are nice and easy to cycle through. The water to the right is the import dock for the old East India Dock, which is nice to look at as well as being a cool bit of history. And the street here is quiet. The bad news is, this is what's keeping the street quiet. Because it's manually controlled, sometimes you have to wait for someone to open it. Surely a rising bollard would have worked better. And now you have to turn right here onto a cycle track that you could easily miss if you don't know where you're going. That said, once you're on it, the cycle track is wide and surfaced with a nice red asphalt. That said, this isn't an especially attractive place to cycle. There's lots of traffic on this large multi-lane roundabout, even on a Sunday afternoon. And these wide entrances and exits invite drivers to speed as they come on and off the roundabouts. They should be narrowed a bit, which would also make it easier to cross. The cycle track here is narrowed by vegetation and by clutter, and the surface is also in a very bad condition. Compare it to the main road, look at how much space and how smooth that is. This just feels a bit mean. This bit's a bit better. It's smooth, it's wide, it's well marked, and there's a nice colour contrast. The visibility when crossing this slip road is quite good. Unfortunately, this cycle track is quite narrow and the surface isn't great. But even though these barriers are ugly, they do protect us from the main road, which is good. We're crossing Bow Creek here, which is where the River Lee runs out into the River Thames, and the views here are really impressive. And I'm not gonna lie, this downhill bit is quite fun. And I can't imagine this person thinks it's unsafe to pop a wheelie here. Now, up until late last year, we could simply turn right at this next roundabout, go down a quiet road, and then emerge onto a pedestrianised area where the new City Hall is. Unfortunately, due to the construction of the Silvertown Tunnel, that's not possible at the moment. We're going to talk about this later, but keep that in mind for now. We're going to follow the official diversion route. Something that this delivery driver clearly doesn't have the time for. We won't mark it down for that, by the way, but it is a bad sign. Anyway, this cycle track is very narrow and the surface is not very good. And here you have to give way to a slip road that's going downhill off a major road onto that big wide roundabout. Now, having to give way is not necessarily a problem, and today the drivers are slowing down and being careful. But what is a problem is that you have to give way to 2 lanes of traffic where the natural speed is quite fast. You don't know if someone's going to come off this slip road and absolutely cane it for the roundabouts. This does not feel safe. In the end, I waited for this car to pass, and even so, the crossing was blocked because the car had to give way at the roundabouts. By the way, this feels even scarier at night because there's no working lighting under that underpass. And here, again, we have to give way to a wide slip road, not knowing if somebody's about to come hooning around that roundabout. And I'm just going to pause here for a second. So, giving way to traffic on a main road is one thing. Giving way to a back entrance to an apartment building that's used solely for these rubbish skips is just totally unnecessary. As a reminder, this is the main, signed, official cycle route that connects central London with City Hall, and yet it needs to cede priority to a servicing entrance that's used maybe once a week, if that. No pun intended, but this truly does show the priorities of the people who put down these markings. Quite literally rubbish. -2. In fact, these give-way lines are literally the only help that pedestrians and cyclists have to cross all the arms of this roundabout. And once we get to the route we need to take, there is literally no separated space for cycling. The wide street with the central barrier invites drivers to speed. And this person with the SUV should not have parked on the pavement. This doesn't affect cycling so much, but it does show who's top of the pecking order around here. This advanced stop box is supposed to make it easier for me to turn right by allowing me to get a head start on traffic behind me. But the problem here is that drivers simply drive into them. You can't see it here, but the car behind me was driving into the box on my left, which didn't feel safe at all. No substitute for actual protection. What's clear as you cycle down here is that the road layout is just completely broken. It's obviously designed for maximum capacity, for funneling vehicles into the Excel Centre, but most of the time, this traffic simply isn't there, so you're left with this enormous road layout and no physically protected space for cycling. But also quirks like this. 2 separate sets of traffic lights within 50 metres of each other, and you have to wait for both. Also note that the pedestrian crossings are staggered. The person in front of us has had to wait twice, and eventually simply gives up. We're pretty much there now. All we need to do is turn right. And there it is. Now, we could go to the cycle parking here, but instead we'll carry on onto this pedestrianised area towards the front door. Cycling used to be allowed here, but new, very small signs have appeared on the top of these large bollards, which ban cycling for safety reasons, along with, among other things, scooters, skateboards, drones, and, fouling. Now, we didn't mark down the old City Hall for having a no cycling zone at the front, and there are legitimate reasons you might not want people to walk out of the building straight into the path of oncoming cyclists. But at the same time, we can't really let this slide when they've disallowed cycling in a place where it was previously okay. And particularly not when the signs showing this are so tiny they're easily missed and no alternative is signposted. By the way, this is the cycle parking. It's covered by CCTV, which is good, but it's not covered by anything else. And these stands, some of them have come loose and have just been left to lie on the floor. Some additional stands are being built opposite, which is good, and this one has a tiny bit more shelter, but this should have been finished before City Hall moved in, not after. That said, the views here are nice. You can see the cable car, city airport, some nice sunsets, and there's an open water swimming area here if that's your thing. So we'll give it a final +1 for the environment, which gives us a grand total of -72. This is made up of 34 positive points for cycling, and in fairness, we did travel along mainly protected tracks and quiet streets, and there were some really good parts. Unfortunately, we also recorded 53 negative points for cycling. This is not just where the infrastructure disappears, like at Tower Bridge, or where things like surfaces have deteriorated. There are some cases where the infrastructure is good, like on Cable Street, and it's so good that it's been a victim of its own success, and it's now too narrow for the volume of people that want to use it. But arguably, the most pressing issue for the new City Hall is the nearby construction site for the Silvertown Tunnel. This is why the route we took was around that massive roundabout rather than a convenient shortcut. As part of the project, that roundabout will be rebuilt, and a 2015 visualization imagines it looking like this: an ocean of tarmac which is even harder to cross, a narrow shared path for pedestrians and cyclists who, again, have to play second fiddle to cars. And as for the tunnel itself, East London desperately needs more high-quality river crossings to knit the communities on both sides of the Thames together, and yet, in the Silvertown Tunnel, cycling and walking will be banned. Only motor traffic will be allowed, and the only way to use it if you don't have a car or motorbike will be to get the bus or a taxi. If the Mayor of London is truly serious about getting people out of their cars, which he should be given the climate, air pollution and energy crises, then maybe he needs to look at getting his own house in order. That needs to include meaningful improvements for some of the Cinderella cycle links to the new City Hall, and maybe considering whether a new tunnel for cars is really the right thing to be building in the current climate.